Okay, folks, we're here for catfish rigging and open questions. My name is Mark Blauvelt. I'm a long time, 22 plus years of fishing catfish tournaments. Let's see here. I've won lots of local tournaments over the years. I figure I have almost 300 tournaments under my belt. Been doing this a long time. I'm old school. So anyway, catfish is growing like crazy in the last 5-6 years. The internet helps and hurts both at the same time, but we all understand that. You can watch loads of YouTube, social media stuff, TikToks, it's all out there. It's really growing, and so this will help educate you a little bit. If you guys have questions, just pipe up, put your hands up, whatever. It's pretty much open, but I'm going to talk about some basic rigs and different types of things and when and why you might want to use different types of tackle. Okay? Okay, so with that, I'm going to start with the fact that most of my outfits that I fish with are bait casters, right? Bait casting reels as opposed to spinning rods. Personal choice, a lot of guys use the spinning rods. It's just personal preference. There's no real benefit one way or the other, I don't think. So it's just up to how you want to do that. Okay, so don't feel like, oh, you got to have a bait caster if you don't know how to cast one. It's just like anything else, you just learn. It's slow, and once you get the hang of it, they're great. Just my personal preference. I am sponsored by B&M poles and several other different products that we'll talk about. As a tournament angler, people are like, oh, you use that because they give it to you for free or at a discount. Well, when I'm out in a tournament, it better work. Right? My name's on the line, my money's on the line. So, you know, all of my sponsors I've had for many years, they're tried true products, and when I'm out fishing, I trust them at 120%. So, you know, as a tournament guy, that's very important that you're able to trust your equipment. And we'll talk about that a little bit. So just to start with, I assume everybody in here has caught some catfish somewhere. A lot of guys are anchoring or fishing from shore. I'm typically a boat guy, although I live in Dayton, so I fish the Great Miami River a lot from shore. I'll cast out and fish for flatheads and stuff like that. But most of the time I'm traveling around the country fishing different bodies of water. Last week I was in Virginia for a big tournament, took second place, yay, that was great, down in Virginia. This weekend I'll be in Nashville at Old Hickory Lake. In 2 weeks I'll be down on Pickwick Lake in Alabama. So I travel all over the country, mostly the eastern US. So, okay, so we're gonna start by talking about, you know, if I was gonna pick one general rod to use, it would be, you know, in this case it's a 7.5 foot one-piece rod. It's a medium heavy action. Okay, you can buy rods that are graphite. Graphite rods are going to be lighter and stiffer, but they're also more brittle. Okay, so as opposed to maybe a what they call S-glass is a common rod that isn't as stiff, but it has more flex to it. So this rod is a combination of the two. So as you can see, most of the bend in this rod is in the top half. If this was an S-glass rod, that bend would pretty much come all the way down to here. They're more flimsier, and they definitely have a different application for people. But anyway, medium heavy rod will cover every fish from 3 pounds to, I mean, I use these rods. I've caught many fish in the 50 to 60 pound range, so always looking for that bigger one. But, you know, this is kind of a good general rod. I mean, you can catch channel catfish with something like this. So a medium to medium heavy rod is going to be probably what you're looking for across the board. Now, what you'll notice right away is that on this particular rig that I'm using, we'll talk about this, I have several things. I have, in this case, I'm using 30-pound mono. I'm sponsored by Vicious, so I use a combination of Vicious, but I also use some other different lines as well. Berkeley Chrome Spec on the mono and Vicious for my braid. Again, both solid products, they work great. Now, if I was river fishing for flatheads, blue catfish, or big channel catfish, like bigger than like 5 or 7 pounds, I would probably stick with about 30-pound test. Okay, so 30-pound test line on the mono is going to be pretty standard. And people are like, well, what if I'm catching a fish that's bigger than 30 pounds? Will it break? Not really, because what happens is if you understand the flex of the rod is going to give, and then a smooth drag. So if a big fish grabs this and he pulls, right, he's going to pull that line off my reel. So having a smooth drag is very important, whether it's a spinning rod or a spinning reel or a bait caster. Always good to know. So, I mean, I could use, you know, a $9 Zebco reel and catch a 100-pound fish. As long as that drag was working correctly, that wouldn't be a problem. So, something to think about. The other thing is that if I snag 30-pound line, you know, I can tighten down my drag or wrap it around a reel handle, and I can break 30-pound test. It's hard, but 30 pounds is stronger than you think it is. But you can still break 30. Once you go to 40, you have to cut your line, and then you end up losing line and half, you know, every month you're like, I got to put more line on. So, because normally if I break my line, you know, 95% of the time it's going to break right there. So, okay, tangled up here. All right, so a very standard rig that we'll talk about is what's called a Santee Cooper rig. It was developed back in the late 80s, and there's really nothing new in catfishing. Catfishing, the rigs and stuff tends to be like everything else. So walleye guys have dragged baits and stuff for years, and then the catfish guys copied it. You know, so you know, people think sometimes in the catfish world, oh, I got this new thing that nobody's ever tried before. Well, there is no such thing. Trust me. Everybody somewhere along the line has tried many things. As a tournament guy, you know, I'm always looking for the next great thing, just like you see in bass fishing. You know, every year there's one lure that seems to be a new lure that the fish really like because they've never seen it before. 3 years later, you can't hardly catch those bass because they've been caught 2 or 3 or 4 times over the years off that lure. They're not going to come back. So I think catfish are the same way. Everybody's looking for the next new technique, the next new secret something. I don't know, whatever it is. We're all looking for that. So this is pretty typical. You go to any tournaments around the country, this is, you know, half the boats are going to be running a rig just like this. So I run 30-pound main line. I have what's called a sinker slide. Okay, and it's just a snap, not a snap swivel, but just a snap that's allows this thing to slide back and forth. So when I'm traveling, right, I take my sinkers off, right, I open the clip, now I got a 5-ounce sinker on there that quick. If I cast out and realize, oh, I need a heavier sinker, it just takes 5 seconds to flip it out. The other nice part is that when you're traveling, you know, people always, you know, hook their hook up to the rod. When you're traveling, what I don't want, get tangled. What I don't want is this bouncing against my rod. Puts a chip in it, puts a weak point in your rod, and that's where a rod will break. So sinker slides are a nice addition. Just makes it easy to do that, and then you don't have any problem. You'll notice I have 2 of these little sliding things here. I don't know if you can hear them, but there are little rattles in there. And dealing with catfish, so everybody knows catfish smell their baits, right? But they also have a lateral line down the side like a bass, so they can feel vibrations, and they can also sense a rattle. So just like crankbaits have rattles in them, same deal. right? So if you're a smallmouth bass, your primary sense is your sight, right? If they can see a bait, they're chasing it. So a catfish, his primary sense that he uses is his smell, which is on his whole body and also on his whiskers. They have scent pores where they can smell things and zero in on them, sort of like a shark. They talk about a shark can track down a drop of blood a mile away. Well, catfish can do the same thing. So with that, let me throw another good tip at you. If you're getting ready to go fishing and you're pumping gas on your way to there, probably not a good thing, because we all know how strong the smell of gas is on your hands. One drop, think about that. So as a tournament guy, we never get gas. We always get gas the night before the tournament. We gas up the boats and the trucks beforehand. If one guy has to get gas, he's not cutting bait the next day. Now you might think that's stupid, but if that means the difference between one fish, that can make all the difference in the world. And remember, they talk about a catfish can smell like 1,000 times better than a bloodhound, and a bloodhound can smell 1,000 times better than a regular dog or whatever. So if you think about that, one drop of gas, think about what that can do. You always hear stories of people talking about, oh, we spray WD-40 on our bait, or they use soap or anything like that. So the key ingredient in WD-40 is fish oil. So think about that. If you know, so it definitely works. Would I recommend doing that? No, but just so you know, that's why, you know, if you drop a drop of oil, what's it do on water, right? It wrings out. So oil is what those catfish, when they smell that, they're like, oh, there's something there. I need to check it out and see what it is. So the reason we use the rattles is because the smell is their primary. We're trying to focus on their secondary sense, which might be their lateral line where they can hear it, okay, or feel the vibration. Catfish have eyes. If they can see a bait, they'll hit a bait. I catch them on crankbaits. I catch them on jigs when I'm crappie fishing. So, I mean, if they can see it in clear water, they're going to hit it. In the spring, we deal with muddy water a lot of times. So, you know, all our lakes will fill up here and the rivers are high. It's a good time. Fish are feeding because there's lots of food coming into the lake or river at that time. So, but if the water's muddy, they lose their eyesight, right? They're not using it. So now they're relying more so on the smell, but then also the rattles. Over 20 years of using rattles, and I made a lot of money using rattles before a lot of people did. In muddy water, it definitely helps, because I think it helps them, you know, feel the vibration, they hear it, and they zero in on it. So, you know, thinking like a fish is going to help you catch fish. So I always use this analogy. You're hungry, you're driving down the road, and you're like, oh, there's Wendy's, oh, there's Kentucky Fried Chicken, there's, you know, all these restaurants, and you're driving down the road, but all of a sudden you smell a flame grilled burger from Burger King or whatever, and you're like, man, that smells really good. Even though our sight is our primary, that smell makes the decision where I'm going to go eat that day. So, because we're all animals. I mean, so think about that. Oh, sorry. Thought somebody was asking a question. Never mind. So, I always tell people sometimes you got to think like a fish to figure out how to catch those fish. So that's one good analogy. All right. So we were talking about the rig. So after my 30-pound main line, I got a sinker slide. I got rattles, and rattles can be different. So these are just little rattles. You can also put different types of rattles there. I have a swivel, and then I tie to, typically I use about a 60 or 80 pound main line. It's very heavy. This is what's touching the bottom and the rocks and things like that. So it's a little heavier, a little thicker, so it doesn't break. Okay, so in this case we have a peg float. Now the peg float is going to allow this bait, when this sinker is on the bottom, if I cast this out and this is on the bottom, right, this peg float is going to hold my bait up 6, 8 inches off that bottom. So people think catfish are true bottom feeders. They're not. They will scrounge on the bottom when they need to, but for the most part, they like to be a foot to 3 foot off the bottom. Now, in the late summer, when there's not much oxygen in the lakes and you have what they call a thermocline, you'll catch fish 10 feet down in 50 feet of water because all the oxygen is in the upper half of the column. But that's usually in late summer. So anyway, another reason that we use this peg float, let's say I'm casting out live bluegills and I'm fishing for a flathead catfish, right? So if I'm not using this peg float and I just have this and I cast it out and I kind of prop my rod up against a stick or something, and for 3, 4, 5 minutes I'll see the tip moving just a little bit where that bluegill's trying to get away. And then after about 5 minutes, I never see my rod tip move anymore. And that's because that bluegill's not stupid, right? He's like found a rock or a limb or something and he'll swim under it and he'll sit on the bottom and he's not moving because he knows he's about to get eaten out there in the middle of the lake somewhere. So if you use a peg float, that bluegill, he'll swim around, he'll swim to the bottom, and that float will slowly pull him back up. Then he swims back down, and then he rests, and that float will slowly pull him back up. So he's forced to fight against the float the whole time, and so he will continually fight and flutter, and that's what you want. Same if you're fishing a shad, okay? Now the difference between a shad and a bluegill when you're using for bait is a shad has to keep swimming to stay alive, right? Shad do not stay still, where a bluegill will just sit still and not make a move. But a shad will keep, trying to get away because if he's not swimming, he can't breathe. That's just the way they are as filter eaters. People like bullheads for bait, for flatheads, little bullhead catfish if you can find them. The biggest reason why is those guys never give up. They will they'll fight against that sinker. They'll drag that sinker halfway across the lake, but they'll never give up. They're strong. And that causes bigger fish to pay attention to them because the fish is, kicking hard and he's fluttering. We've all caught a fish, hooked a fish, a crappie, a bluegill, and had them, darting all over, and you'll see a bass come out of nowhere and try to get them. And that triggers a fish when those fish are fighting like that. So the peg float, a situation like fishing live bait is a great option. Now, suppose I was in the river and I cast out. What you have to realize is that in the current, if the current's coming this way and there's a big rock here, what happens is the bottom foot or so of the water around all the rocks, there's not much current there. The current is above everything. There's like a calm right on the bottom because of all the rocks and limbs and everything sitting on the bottom. So if I cast out without a float and my bait gets into that calm spot right behind a rock, my scent is not going downriver. It's just staying in that calm spot, maybe a foot or so around the bait. So if there's not a fish that finds that, no good. If I throw out a peg float, something that's going to hold my bait up in the current a little bit, a foot or a foot and a half in that current, and it's doing this, now my scent is going downriver right on that edge between the calm water and the current water. And those fish will sit in the calm and they'll put their nose up and they'll smell something and they'll be like, oh, I smell something. There's something in front of me and it's coming, or they don't know if it's coming at them or if the smell's coming at them. So they just kind of do this back and forth, right? Everybody jokes how a fish swim like this. Well, catfish are doing this because they're like, oh, I smell it. Oh, no, I don't smell it. And they come back and they're like, oh, I smell it. No, I don't smell it. And they keep, so they're doing that. They're zeroing in on that. And that's why when you cast out, you wait 15, 20 minutes for a fish that's close to come up and get that bait. Sometimes if you leave that bait out there for 2 hours, every hour you'll get another fish. That's because he's come from further away and another one's coming from further away. And it takes them a while to get there. So the peg float, if you're not using any type of peg float, you should do that. It's very versatile. Okay, so in this case, I've got about a 2-foot leader. That's pretty standard. There are times in the late summer, if I was fishing for like blue catfish, I would run like a 4-foot leader to get my bait 2 feet, 3 feet off the bottom. There are different times when fish are really active. So when they're hunting, blue catfish are always moving, looking for bait. Channel catfish are going to be closer to the bottom, or they can go down to the bottom if they have to, or they'll come up a couple feet to a bait either also. So a couple things to think about. I have used the Boss Cat Daiichi hooks for 8 or 9 years. Great hooks. Any of the name brand hooks will work great. I will tell you that when it comes to reels and hooks, you get what you pay for. So when you're catfishing, you tend to lose a lot of terminal tackle. You lose sinkers, you lose swivels, you lose floats, you lose hooks, because you're always throwing around wood and structures like that where you're going to end up losing stuff. You're going to get snagged and break off. So what I will tell you is that I would recommend you stick with a name brand hook, because I can get a Chinese copy of this for 1/4 of the price. But I can tell you, when you have a fish of a lifetime on, and that hook bends out or breaks, or the line gets cut because the eyelet of the hook is not very good and it's sharp, you're going to wish you'd paid a little bit more for hooks. I'm just, that hook is the single most important thing that connects you to that fish. If you're a race car driver, right, your car is only as good as your tires, what's touching the road. So it's the same thing, so I know it's easy, because when you're starting out, you lose a lot of tackle and you're like, man, this is killing me. I lost $10 worth of stuff today. Either don't fish near a structure and don't catch any fish, or, pony up a little bit and get some a little bit quality hooks as you can afford to do that. I would highly recommend that. The same holds true for reels. I happen to like Abu reels, Abu Garcia reels. I have like 30 of them. Hopefully my wife never finds out what they're all worth. But anyway, she'll retire good if I go. Anyway, you can buy, in bait casters, you can buy $49 reels, and they'll work great for a year or two, which may be fine if you only fish 2 or 3 times a year. Those will last you 5 or 10 years. If you're like me and you're fishing, 60, 70, 80 days a year, I need a reel that's going to be much more quality and long lasting. And if I have problems with the reel, I can find, this is like the Chevy of reels. Every bait shop carries parts for Abu Garcia reels. So if I have a problem, finding parts is no problem. If you buy some no-name reel, everybody's going to be like, I don't even know where to get parts for it. So just food for thought there. Okay. All right. I am a big proponent of circle hooks. You guys know what circle hooks are? Who doesn't know what a circle hook is? Be honest. Okay. All right. I know somebody's lying out there. All right. So circle hook is a regular hook, but it's got an extra, at the end of the hook point, there's a little turn, there's a little barb down there. And catfish are notorious when you cast out that they'll swallow the bait because you're not paying attention, right? You're falling asleep, it's been an hour, you're drinking beers on the side of the river, whatever that people do. And all of a sudden you're like, oh, I got a fish. And that catfish has swallowed the hook. So you have to cut the line. So, which is the best thing to do. That fish can work through that hook. That's most of the time. But circle hook is designed so if that fish moves at all, that hook will catch in the side of his mouth. Most of the time, it'll be in the side. Every once in a while in the bottom, and every once in a while in the top lip. But usually you get them in the sides. It's a beautiful thing for catching and releasing catfish, because there's only so many catfish out there. So as a tournament guy, I'm big on releasing them. If you're going to keep some fish, keep some 2 to 3 pounders to eat. Those are the ones you want to eat. You don't want to eat a 50 pounder. It's the same reason we don't make 20-year-old cows into steaks. Okay, think about that. The bigger they are, the meat is tough. The muscle is not tender. All the food we eat are when animals are in their spawning prime. whether that be sheep, deer, cows. You know, you're looking at a 2 to 3 year old thing, even though they live to 20. So catfish are the same way. The best eating fish is always going to be those small 2 to 3 pounders, whether it's a blue catfish or a channel catfish. Okay? All right. So this kind of covers a basic anchoring rig. Now, let's say I'm on a boat and I want to what they call drag baits or troll for catfish or drift for catfish. I can use this same exact rig. I can change this out in just a second, and I can use a multitude of different types of what we call dragging weights. So I can use just a pencil sinker. That's a 2-ounce lead pencil sinker. I can hook it on here. These are like flexible, but they have like buckshot in them. So this is like a 5-ounce sinker, and so I can just hook this right up here. And this is a different company's version of the same thing. So it's got a weight down here, and it's got some float, so that hopefully as this drags across the bottom, it drags like so. Okay? So these are called dragging sinkers. So basically what's going to happen here is as this is being dragged across the bottom, right, it's going to do this, and that float's going to hold my bait a foot or a foot and a half off the bottom, like so, as that drags. That long, skinny sinker is relatively snag proof. You will snag them in rock. And if you're dragging them through trees and wood piles, you're going to lose them. But for the most part, they're relatively snag proof, and they're flexible. And it's got like a rubber coating, so if it gets jammed in between two rocks, if you pull really hard, a lot of times you'll get them back out. So these are called structure snakes. These are called reel 'em ups, and these are pencil sinkers. All of this terminal tackle that I talk about, hooks, floats, all of this stuff, line, catfish stuff. The Tackle Bandit booth is kind of over about 2 rows right over there. They carry all that stuff. They're a leader in the national catfish supply chain. So if there's anything catfish you need, they got. And their prices are as good as any. So, all right. So, again, if I'm going to be on a boat and I'm drifting with the wind, I can throw rods out the back or out the side, just however the boat is drifting, and just let these drag behind the boat, a long cast. And you'll know when a fish hits, because it'll be like doing this as it's bouncing over stuff on the bottom. And people are always like, is that a bite? Is that a bite? I'm like, you'll know when you get a bite, because the bite will be like, it'll be much quicker, and then it will pull. And basically that circle hook at that point has done its job. You just start reeling down on it. It's a beautiful thing. It's a great thing. So, all right. So this is kind of what we would call a dragging rig. So it looks just like this. Okay. Now here's something else. So let's say this is dragging across the bottom like so, and this bait is, a foot and a half off of the bottom. What I could do is if, let's say there's a big cold front just came through, and I think the fish are all down in the mud and on the bottom, I can move this float up to here, and then this will just kind of, it's like that float's not even there. So it's not like I have to re-rig or have to change. I can adjust that float, or I can slide it down halfway, and then that float, will keep it, 6 inches off the bottom, as opposed to maybe a foot off the bottom here. So I can adjust my float to adjust how deep I am fishing. So because people are like, oh, those fancy rigs, I have to retie them and all that. No, not necessarily. Something like this is very versatile. You can do a lot of things with it. So, okay, all right. So that kind of talks a little bit about like an anchor or a shore rig where I'm casting out. Also talked a little bit about a dragging rig if I'm drifting or dragging with the boat. So one more thing I want to talk about is whether I'm anchored, shore fishing, or dragging, some people take off this peg float and they put what's called like a demon dragon, or it's like a top water plug. You hear all the rattles in there. And they'll slide it, there's no hooks on it. You just slide the line through the front and the back, and it would replace this. And as this is going through the water, it rattles a little bit. I will tell you, these are not as, they don't float as much weight as a peg float. But we use a lot of these too, just to rattle up fish. So you'll hear people talk about, the biggest brand on the market is called Demon Dragons, but a lot of different companies make these. So you'll see them over there, and that's what people are using them for. So anytime you cast out and there's movement, you're going to get a little rattle. So just want to throw that at you too. Okay, different rigs. Okay. So this particular rod, so that one I had was a medium heavy. This one is a heavy rod, meaning the action is much stiffer. It's a pool cue, okay? So it's much stiffer rod. So when would I use a much stiffer rod? I use these rods when I am vertical drifting in the boat. So you're like, what is that? So let's say in the Ohio River, and I can do it in the lakes too, but typically in our lakes here, we're dealing with smaller fish, channel catfish. If I'm on the Ohio River or any other big river, I'm looking for big blue catfish, 50, 40, 50, 60 pounders, hopefully. So if I'm on the Ohio River, and once we get after 4th of July, we don't have much current in the river slows down. It's almost like a big lake between all of our dams. You go down to Meldal Dam or the Greenup Dam, any of those pools back there, and you'll have like half a mile an hour current. The water's just barely moving. So in that case, what we'll do is we will cast, well, we don't cast rods out. I'll put a bigger weight on. So here's a 6 ounce. Right? Just takes a second with my sinker slide. And we'll put this in a rod holder on the boat, and I'll just drop it right to the bottom, right off the side. It goes to the bottom. I'm gonna reel down till I find the sinker, and I'm gonna reel one time. Well, sometimes I mix them up, but if I reel one time, you can see that bait is now 18 inches off the bottom. So I'm gonna put this in my rod holder in the boat so it's vertical like that. And I know that it's, as the boat's drifting down, I may have 6 or 8 of these around the boat, okay, in a big circle just as the boat is drifting, and we're covering water by going right down the center of the channel or outside an outside edge. So the reason I want a stiffer rod when I'm fishing like this, and I'm using braid now, because remember, mono has stretch, braid does not. So now I'm switching to braid so that there's no stretch. So that when I'm sitting here and that fish comes up and he grabs the bait and he pulls down on it, there's no stretch in the line. And I have a stiff rod. So the harder he pulls, the deeper the hook, the circle hook, is going into his mouth. So all I have to do when he's tugging on it like that is, grab the rod out of the rod holder and start fighting him. Again, so that's vertical drifting. So there's a specific application there where I would want a little stiffer rod as opposed to a flimsy rod. When they grab it, there's not enough resistance with a flimsy rod to set the hook for them, even though they're doing it themselves. So something to think about there. Okay, and just keep catching that line. Same typical rig, but no float because that bait is just fluttering around down below that sinker. Okay, what's neat is if you have a halfway decent fish finder and you put these off the back of the boat, you can see the sinker down there, and you'll see when a fish is coming up looking at it on your sonar or down imaging. Better yet, if you have live scope, it's really cool because you can watch the fish come up and circle it, and they're sniffing it before they finally grab it. So that's pretty cool. Okay. Any questions on something like this type of rig? It's similar, but slightly different for each application. Obviously, if you're starting out, you just have one basic rod, and I can do that with that rod that I had too. I just slide that peg float all the way up here so it's not in the way, and just let my bait hang right below it. I do that all the time, and that will work also. All right, another rig we'll talk about real quick is called bumping. Bumping is kind of a newer fad in the last maybe 10 years in catfishing, and it's probably one of the most advanced techniques to use. So what it's used for is when you're in heavy current, like 1 to 5 mile an hour current. Okay, 5 mile an hour current doesn't sound like much. Let me tell you what, that's the Mississippi at full speed. 5 miles an hour is crazy. But on the Mississippi, where there's no dams below Memphis, or actually below St. Louis, there's no dams on the Mississippi. So it's free flowing. So those outside bends are 80, 90 feet deep, 100 foot deep, and 5 or 6 miles an hour. It's crazy. And you're like, you can see the fish down there, but how do you get a bait down to them in that situation? So they figured out that by bumping, you have a shot at getting your bait down to them. Now, first thing you notice is I have a rod sleeve on this one, but not on those. That is because, remember I talked about a graphite rod being stiffer? It's also more sensitive, right? Everybody talks about graphite rods because they're sensitive. So, in this case, this rod is designed for bumping. Here. And this is a very stiff rod because it's graphites. But if I'm not careful and I high stick a fish by, getting that rod way up like the fly fishing guys do, this rod will break. It's not designed for that. I have to fight it right up to me. Now, what we do is in that heavy current, is we point the boat straight up river, and I turn the trolling motor on, and I try to slow my speed down to a third or a half of what the actual current is. So if the current is 2 miles an hour, I would put my trolling motor on 3 or whatever, and slow me down to about 1 mile an hour. So, and I point it straight up the center of the river. So I'm basically going down the river backwards because I'm fishing off the back of the boat. I'm going slower than the current, so my bait smell is still going past. It's, it's going past where the bait is. So what we do is we do a 3-way rig, okay? And in this case, this is set up for, I've got 2 hooks on here because I'll usually fish like a skipjack or a shad that's like 8 or 10 inches long because I'm not messing around. I'm looking for a really good fish, even though I'll catch 5-pounders with this too because they'll get that back hook when they grab the back of a bait. And what we do is we use like a cannonball sinker. It's just a big round sinker. And put this on here. I just have a little single snap there. But basically, this is a 3-way rig doing the same concept. So what's happening is, and I have a little rattle on there, but I don't have a peg float. So I'm gonna let line out right behind the boat. Remember, that current's going past me. So as I hit free spool and got my thumb on and it goes down and it hits bottom finally, I'll engage my thumb on there, but not in the reel. So I'll lift it up about 6 or 8 inches, and that pulls the weight off, and then the current pushes it back a couple feet. So your bait's doing this. It goes back, you pull it up, it goes back, you pull it up, it goes back. And so you're walking baits down the bottom. So the bottom of the river does this, And this keeps your bait right on the bottom because you are constantly in touch with the bottom. And you know, you're only raising the rod just a few inches and you're just doing this. And you may have to do it for a mile, okay? But when a fish hits, it's pretty cool because it about jerked the rod out of your hand. Especially when you're not paying attention. After a while, you're like, oh, look, an eagle. Yeah. You know, and all of a sudden, you know. And it's probably the funnest way to catch fish. But you got to have current. You got to have current more than 1.5 miles an hour. So here on the Ohio River, in the spring, we have that. So I can bump during the spring, or I can go below dams where there's more current, and I can bump. If you've never done it, go on YouTube and watch some bumping videos. Just bump, search for bumping and catfish. And most of them will be on the Ohio River, Tennessee River, Mississippi River. It's pretty cool when you see how those fish hit. There's just nothing better than having the rod in your hand and you feel one, you know, thump, and it, you know, pulls the rod down. It's pretty cool. Plus, then you're fighting that fish through heavy current, trying to get him back to the boat. So as soon as we hook a decent fish, we always turn the trolling motor off. So now I'm going at the same speed as the current. So it's pretty cool. It's a fun way. So those you know, it takes a lot of practice to get good at that touch. But just like anything else, you know, it'd be like a professional bass guy, you know, being really good with a jig. You know, he's got the touch. You know, you got to tell when I'm bouncing over rock. You can tell if I'm hitting wood or sand or mud. I can tell what the bottom is by how that sinker is hitting the bottom, and that's kind of cool. But it's nothing better than when a fish hits it. So, all right. So with that, let me open up for some questions. I'm sure everybody's got some questions here. He's got a question up front.
What got you into tournament? Like, in case of like, how did you know you were good enough to go out and do it, or did you ever know you were good enough?
Okay, so his question is how did I get into tournament fishing? How did I stick it out? Was I successful enough to figure it out? So I'm a competitive person. So a lot of people are competitive. So golf is an old man's game who is competitive. Doesn't have the body to compete at a basketball or something like that. So they play golf because it's competitive. So I have fished always since I was a kid. I played soccer. I coached soccer for years at a high level. I was a cyclist early on, Greg LeMond days, all that stuff. Many time Ohio and state champ, ranked nationally many times. I got into competitive cross-country skiing for years, back when we used to have snow. And then I played soccer till my body couldn't do it anymore, but I was fishing the whole time because I love to fish. And so I was a fly fishing guide for many years here locally on the Mad River and for steelhead and things, salmon. And in 2002, I'd always loved catching catfish. I mean, it was just intrigued by catfish. So as a trout fishing guide, I will tell you that trout are stupid fish. I reached a point I traveled for my jobs. I fished in like 40 states for trout. I can go to any trout stream and mostly catch fish, just about any time, anywhere. Catfish are not that way. I've been doing this for 22 years. I still can't figure catfish out. Every time you think you got them figured out, no. So I love that competitive spirit of doing that. Just getting into some small local tournaments, and sooner or later luck will come your way. Anybody that thinks that luck is not part of fishing competitively is wrong. If you get into tournaments, try to fish local. Like they have a lot of stuff here on Hoover with the big blues and Hoover, and you don't need much of a boat. You just need a halfway decent live well to cover that. That'd be the first place I would send you to do. If you do well there, tag along with somebody going the Ohio River, experience something all different, things like that. So, we can talk about that later. I can get you some information afterwards. So, but good question. Other questions? I'm sorry? Oh, okay. His question was, do I use mostly live bait? Rarely do I ever use live bait. One, it's a pain to catch it the day before, keep it alive for 2 days. That can be a real problem. Now, if I was fishing for flatheads only, I would fish live bait only. Well, mostly live bait. Spring and late fall, I would fish cut bait. So usually I'm catching skipjack and shad. I'm a bait dealer here in Ohio, so I catch shad all the time. So shad is what I normally use. Cut bluegills, shad and skipjack. If I was fishing for blue cats, it's mostly skipjack. Here for channel cats, mostly shad. A good question. But you can use live bait. It's just a lot more work to get it and keep it alive for when you're fishing. You know, I wouldn't spend, as a tournament guy, tournaments start at first light typically, or half an hour. I don't have time in the morning to catch live bait. I may throw a cast net and try to catch some shad right at the ramp, but typically I better have my bait ahead of time. And as a tournament angler, you're only as good as your bait. If you got crappy bait, it can make a big difference. So, other questions? Somebody's got questions. A gentleman over there's got a question. I know he does. No, I'm pointing at you. Yeah. Okay. That's a great question. He said, if I'm not in a boat and I'm shore fishing, what am I looking for catfish? What kind of structure? I want a deep, slow pool. I don't want current. I just want I want the deepest, slowest area, big pool. So a big pool is going to harbor a big fish. Okay? So typically a big pool will be on the outside bend. Streams meander, okay, left and right. If you look on maps, right, they do this. And so typically that outside bend is a pool. The straightaway is a riffle in the middle. So you have a riffle, a glide, and then the pool, and then the tail out. So I would look for that outside bend, because on that outside bend is where big wood piles and things get stuck on the bank. That's where I would look. I'd be up on that high cut bank, just pitching right out into that wood. But also sending some out in the middle. Okay. Next question he says is, what about if I'm in a lake? If you can find a lake map, a topographic lake map, look for places where the original creek channel comes up close to the shore or off a point. If the wind all day yesterday is blowing into this side of the lake, I'm going to fish this side of the lake somewhere, because heavy wind always pushes shad, which is what they're eating, up against that bank. So public access will limit where you can fish. Okay? All right. Anything else? I have one last thing in closing. I have kind of my basic tackle bag up here. Again, all this stuff is available in Tackle Bandit booth. In my bag, I got a good set of stainless steel pliers that won't rust shut. Okay, sinkers. I have a little lanyard here. I got a hook file, which I rarely use. I have some hemostats. I have some nippers, some quality nippers that'll cut braid. I got scissors. I have these Ziploc bags with pre-made rigs in them already, so that way I'm ready to go. So I just tied up a bunch of channel catfish rigs, so they're ready to go. My guiding season, I guide for a company called Wildcat Guide Service, so we go through a lot of tackle. So I'm just starting to tie up a bunch of stuff, stockpile it, keep it in my bag. If I snag and break off, I just have a rig already tied, ready to go, put on there. So anyway, I'm going to close, but I'll be here for a couple minutes if you guys want to take a look at any of this stuff and talk. Again, I'm Mark Blauvelt. You can find me on Facebook. I'm out of the Dayton area, so I'm not too hard to find. So anyway, I appreciate your time. Any questions, you can find me afterwards. I'll also be at the Tackle Bandit booth after this presentation. Thank you.